So today, hi, my name is Jeff. Today we're going to jump into how to design a data model and how to build that data model so that your application works well and can get up and running. And really we're going to focus today on building the data infrastructure underneath the application. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time on the actual list and creating the lists and some of the ins and outs for creating those lists and different types of lists that you may want to consider. So stay tuned. This is part of a series of videos that we're going to actually walk through creating this application, and this happens to be a property management application. So stay tuned. I think you'll enjoy it. So the first thing you need to do, at least for me, the first thing I do is I like to draw everything out. I'm a visual guy, so I like to see things and kind of play around with it on paper first. And so what you see here is an example of some of those drawings. I'm listing out, okay, what do they need to do? I'm listening to the customer, right, what the need is, and I'm just kind of drawing it out on paper so that I can see for myself what it is that needs to be done. And as you see here, I'm starting to formulate maybe what the column headers are going to be, right? What data I'm going to need, where I need my IDs for multi-relational lists, things of that nature. So I'm kind of trying to find my ground here so that I can begin to develop. Because when we start creating the data sources themselves to host the data, we just want to make sure that we've got a majority of the fields in there so that we don't have to keep going back and changing our data source. Additionally, we want to make sure we have the names established for those fields. So for example, we have these names established inside of this list. We don't want to go and what type of data they are. We don't want to go back and modify these. We can, but we want to try to avoid that, as it just could potentially create other problems for you down the road. So we try to get it right first. So, you know, the old saying for a carpenter, right? Measure twice, cut once. And that's really what we're trying to do here. So questions, we're really trying to gather what those fields look like. And then we start plugging those fields into what the different lists might look like. So for example, you can see here, I want to do category within my journal list, which is my primary list, but I want these to be drop downs. Well, I know enough about Power Apps to say, well, I can create those drop downs inside. I can create another list and call that list and then create a collection to populate that drop down. This then gives my user maximum flexibility of how they modify that category list so that when they're using their site journal, they can quickly see the new changes. And we want to make sure that these lists exist and sublists so that it gives maximum flexibility to the end user. And so that's what we're doing. I'm going to walk you through one of those examples today. And you can see here, so here, how do we pre-build? What are some of the flows? What are some of the challenges? And then what does some of the reporting look like and the user interface looks like? Now, we're not going to go through all of this today, so let's just stick with the data model itself. So this is kind of our rough draft, step one of getting it all out. Now, balance this with your customer if you're building it for somebody else to make sure it meets their needs. The next step, so step two, is that we want to figure out what our data source is going to be. In this example, we're using a data source within SharePoint. So we're going to put everything within a SharePoint list, but realize that there are some limiting factors to doing this, performance being one of them. So we're going to walk through how to use a list successfully and be able to still have the performance that you need using different filtering and different ways we present data inside of a gallery on the screens within the application. We're not going to go over that today. We're just going to talk about the data model right now, but stay tuned for other videos on that topic. So We have two lists here. We have one list here that is getting the property information, right? Property ID, the manager, supervisor, building name, and city. That's just what we're getting. It's only one bit of information. And you can see here that we're pulling up some of that information in this UI, right? This user interface where we get the property. We're gonna sort through the property ID. And when we do a form like this one, for example, to collect, and let me rephrase that, it's not a form, it's a collection screen, because I really don't use forms that much inside of Power Apps. But a collection screen, then we'll use this as a feeder. So this will feed the data into our primary application. Let me show you that more in a kind of a whiteboard kind of discussion here. Hold on one sec. All right. So we have a shared whiteboard, which has disappeared on me. Let's see where it is. There it is. Sorry, I have multiple screens here trying to go through this. So let's go ahead and look at this whiteboard real quick. So here we have a user interface. Okay, so just draw this out as a user interface. And you can see that we have a drop down here, and we're just going to put property. Now, inside, this is the journal. So this is where there you are. Okay. This is where they're going to put most of their information, right? There's going to be maybe a text field. Maybe we'll just put comments here, etc. When they populate this field, right, and ultimately hit save, when they populate this field with all their information, they're going to want to pull this information right here. They're going to want to pull that property ID from somewhere. Now, we don't need to list, we don't need inside of the journal to have every potential property ID. We need that to pull down from this list. So we create a different list. We're going to call this list property IDs. Okay, now what this does, and so it's going to list out 1, 2, 3, 4, and Joe Snuffy as the name, and then where it's located. We'll say Panama. Okay. So that's kind of how we're going to put in the information into this list right here, and we're going to list them all out: 2, 4, 5, 6, blah blah blah. Right? You get it? So that when we create this drop down here, we're actually going to load all of this information. Gets loaded into a Power App collection. Okay, now what the collection does is preloads it, and then we take this, so we're going to call this maybe collection. I was going to say Power App, that's funny. Property ID. So we're going to take this collection, and that is what's going to be the items, basically, for this drop down. Okay, so we're going to use this drop down kind of as that primary collection point. So that's kind of what you're seeing on the screen. So let's go back and just review real quick here. So we have the SharePoint list right here that's collecting. This is this list right here, property ID. Okay. Then we have a second list here, right here, which is collecting all of the information. That is this list right here that we talked about, right? Where you collect a whole bunch of information. This whole bunch of information is collecting right here. And you can see the fields right there. Property ID, manager, down to effort. These are built-in fields inside of SharePoint. So these fields right here, and we're not using title, are all of the information that we're collecting. So let's just end the video by how do you create these fields and what are some of the gotchas? First of all, we have single line of text, single line of text, single line of text, multiple line text. Why are all of these text fields? Couldn't they just be selection fields? Couldn't we just have, instead of creating this second list, couldn't we just create within the environment itself, right, within our SharePoint list, why don't we just create a list with a selection criteria, and we'll put this as a choice field, right, and build out, A, B, and C as our options right there. Couldn't we just do this instead of doing all of this right here? Couldn't we just do this? You could. You could create one SharePoint list that has all of that information. There's no doubt about it. The problem is that it will complicate when you start working with Power Apps and with other data, other things that you want to do with this data. Single line of text or multi-line of text. Text is by far the easiest field to work with automation. It's simple, it's clean, it's everything that you want. So we have the complexity here of this, right, that you're adding. These are called complex fields, by the way. So we have this complexity. We've just done it in a second list. And this list then becomes more scalable, and it becomes easier for people to manage in the future that may not want to deal with the complexity of these lists. Again, very, very important. Keep it simple so that they don't have to depend on you to make the changes all the time. You want the customer to be able to change their own stuff over the course of time. And so we are talking about this choice field option inside of a list. And if you notice when you pick choice, see how you can enter the choices? That's what I drew out here, right? And that works great if you're just going to use a SharePoint list and that's all you're going to do. That's okay to use, right? And you create it as a drop down or a radio. But honestly, much better if you use single text. If you use multi-text, okay, which you need if you're going to go over 256 characters, then it defaults to enhanced. Use plain text. For a majority of what people do, they can use plain text. Now, why? Because multi-line text, when you get into any enhanced rich text, it again makes it a little more complicated. So if you don't lose a lot of ground by doing some of these other things, like just creating, for example, creating it in a single text column, for example, if you're not losing any ground, right? If you're not losing any functionality, save yourself the heartache, make it a text field. Anyways, that's all. Today we've talked about building up this data model to support this future application and kind of some of the ins and outs of doing that. Stay tuned for other videos. We're going to actually jump into creating more of these lists, the reason for these lists in future discussions, and kind of expand out to a second video on our data model. And then we'll drop right into creating the app. So stay tuned. Thanks.